You are one of the few Black CEOs in America. You are a frequent guest on our show. What is your take on what is happening in our country right now, from the protests to the looting to our own president saying he wants to use force?
I think for a lot of people, what I've heard from colleagues, from employees, investors, and others, it seems somewhat surreal. I think a lot of people are shocked by the events, the murder of George Floyd, and just, it just seems like every week there's something. I think the thing that's saddening or most frustrating for me is that it's not that shocking. It's not that surreal. It doesn't seem any different than the norm that I've, kind of the reality that I've known, and people that look like me have known pretty much our entire life. You kind of learn these things and these expectations when you're a kid. It's almost, it's like growing up, the conversations that you have with your parents about how to interact with police officers is akin to like the birds and the bees conversation. It's one of those adolescent growing up things that everybody has to have. And so I think, the biggest thing for me has been, almost just a reality check. I think sometimes with being very successful, you amass wealth and you move out of, I'm born and raised in the Bronx, and you go off to prep school and live in the suburbs of Connecticut. And, even though, I've had incidents myself and run-ins with the police, you can sometimes numb yourself to thinking, there's maybe more progress or change than it is. And I think the biggest thing for me and for a lot of other people over the last week is just kind of the wake up call. And I think, it's been a mistake to maybe not be as vocal and take the opportunities that I've had to discuss these type of issues in the past. So.
Now, on that note, you're normally here to talk about the media industry, but you wrote a really moving post about the experiences you've had with police multiple times, starting from when you were 17 years old, dragged out of your car as recently as a few years ago when you were CEO of Tru Optik. I'd love for you to expand on those experiences with us so we can all get a better idea about just what it really means to be Black in America.
Yeah, I think, what I've felt over the last week is, I think, a greater sense of empathy coming from all people. And, it doesn't matter age or race. I think it's been, just horrifying for people to see pretty much somebody get, the modern day lynching or strangled to death by a police officer right in front of us. And I think for me, I have not by any means had the worst experience or interactions compared to people that I know personally and the things that you hear on the news. But I think the thing that is important for people to know is just how frequent these things are. You hear the once every few months about the horrific killing, and I think sometimes are numb to it, but it's really a daily, weekly, yearly, decade after decade thing that's happened. I remember instances as young as 4 or 5 years old with my dad being stopped for not stopping at a stop sign that I know he stopped at. I was in the car, or the condescending questions, whose car is this? And always having to justify, even when you do have wealth or success. I myself have been, handcuffed or been, had a gun pointed at me by police 4 times in my life, yet have never been charged with a crime or even arrested. And so, it's just kind of this perpetual thing that it becomes, what I said in my letter to our shareholders and to our employees, it just becomes emotionally exhausting to think about. And I think that's what's coming out for everybody across the country is just, being fed up.
Meantime, there is the everyday. I mean, what is it like being a Black CEO in America and a Black CEO in your industry?
Yeah, I mean, look, you get used to often being the only one in the room, right? Or one of few, and that's almost that's almost normal. I wouldn't say almost normal, it is normal. But that's not indifferent from your experience with going to prep school in Manhattan, right? Or going to boarding school in Connecticut, or being a young executive at JP Morgan Chase. So this isn't different, right? So it's kind of an environment or something that you're used to. I think, what the other expectation that you have is, I think, from talking with other peers, other Black CEOs and execs, is I think there's a different expectation that we have of ourselves, right? You almost always feel like your successes or your failures are indicative of the entire, race, right? So I think about the capital that we've raised from venture capital firms and all the Fortune 500 clients that we have. And, sometimes I think, if I do well, this is, and I can be successful, this is opening the door for more opportunity for others. But at the same time, I'm very cognizant that very few people have had the opportunity. And if I don't do well, it would be even more difficult for others. And I just don't know that that's a daily thing that other people that don't look like me maybe are as cognizant of. We all have pressures and expectations and motivations and stuff. So I'm not dismissing of the ones that other people have, because I think they're just as valid. I'm just more articulating the uniqueness of, my experience.
Now, it is not incumbent on Black people to lead the change, but it is so helpful to hear from you about what, the rest of us, companies, brands, can do. And so I'm curious what your take is. We're seeing companies put out statements, they're giving money to various organizations, they're going dark. Is that enough?
Nothing is enough if things haven't improved, right? So there's been lots of things that people have done over the years or the decades to make incremental change. In many instances, I would argue that we've taken a step back over the last 5 years, particularly under the current administration, and with a real indifference, I think, to social justice issues, not just for racial. It could be for xenophobia. It could be many other issues. I think what companies need to be careful of is coming off as opportunist or not seeming unique and genuine in the stances that they take, because then it could actually misfire or backfire. I think generally speaking, it is a positive thing that there's more public communication and more people seem to be addressing the issue. So I think that is definitely positive. One of the things that I think caught me the most over the last couple of days was with Viacom CBS and going dark across many of their networks on actual live TV for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. So there's definitely been some powerful things, but I think it just should be genuine at the very least.
Now, speaking of taking a stand, you have Facebook leaving up a post from the president about suggesting that looters be shot, Twitter taking an opposite position, flagging that tweet, hiding it, putting it behind a warning for glorifying violence. Who's right?
Well, it depends on how you look at the role of social media networks. I think Twitter is taking the more stance as being a service for the people and saying that they then have a responsibility to make sure that the service is used in a certain way. Facebook is, much larger. They really view themselves as a utility. Facebook almost wants to consider themselves as the internet or as an extension of the internet itself. And in that case, they want to take no responsibility for how that utility is then used. And so I think it's a difference in philosophy. I know from all of us in the tech industry, you're worried about the Facebooks or the Googles offering your engineers some absurd amount of money and poaching your talent. It's been crazy to see the amount of Facebook people looking for other jobs over the last week. So I think that their own employees are not happy with their stance, and so that's something I think that we all could take notice of.
Now, speaking about the industry, since you are an expert on this, we're in the middle of a health crisis, an economic crisis, and a social crisis. What does that mean for streaming? What does that mean for the media and entertainment industry? What does it look like as we come out of the dust of this?
If these challenges, all were to become endemic and just prolong, it's not good for anybody, right? No industry will eventually do well in that instance. In the near term and in the intermediate term, we've actually seen it be a huge boom to streaming media, right? So the social distancing and people staying at home, we saw over a 60% increase in traffic across many of the leading OTT publishers and the ad tech platforms in just 6 or 7 weeks. So you're talking about the entire industry advancing a year and a half or so in terms of the shift from linear TV to streaming TV in just a matter of weeks. You've seen 30% of the advertisers in so far in Q2 that are using our data for addressable targeting advertising across connected TV and OTT in the US are new first-time buyers of data. So you have a lot of new people trying to figure that out. In terms of, there's been a massive increase in news viewership over the last 2 weeks, right? So not only were people watching the news because of COVID, but now to try to see the protests and the other insight. The news and streaming media have proved themselves, to be, it's almost like what is old is new. And there's just been a flock to that quality information and the way to access it in a convenient way.